I have a running theory, and my theory is that most people who have some sort of distinct view on the world, they have a really specific worldview, most of them have probably at some point had a formative experience in their life that has affirmed that that will be their view of the world. So maybe it's a formative spiritual experience that has led them to think, okay, I definitely need to live this one way because this is what I'm seeing. Maybe maybe they prayed for something, or their family members prayed for something, and they saw God answer it. And so they go back to that and look, that's the formative experience that makes me see the world the way that I do. But this can happen whether someone's a believer or not. I think everyone has some sorts of formative experiences that if you dig back deep enough, maybe you'll find have changed the way that you look at the world. One of my favorite ways that this is illustrated is in a very underrated Disney movie called Meet the Robinsons. Now, this is a movie that I had not seen until my kids. We watched it together, so I missed it when it came out. But there is a character in this movie, and it cracks me up. I'm about to show you one of my favorite 6-second clips from a movie I've ever seen. But there's a character in the movie that is the friend of the main character. And this friend, one night, is kept up all night because the main character is making a science experiment in their room. So it keeps him awake. The next morning, this character, Goob is his name, Goob has a baseball game, but he is so tired from being kept up all night by his roommate that when the time comes for a fly ball to be hit to him, he's fallen asleep. And he misses the catch, and they lose the big game. And what's amazing about this is that Goob becomes one of the bad guys in the movie in the future. And Goob's adult self looks back at that moment, and it's formed the way that he's looked at the world. Because I missed that fly ball, everyone hates me, and it makes him this bitter character in the future. So the scene you're about to see, this is a 6-second scene. This is the adult Goob narrating his experience in the past of what happened after he missed this catch. You have to watch it very closely, and then I'll explain it. So as an adult, Goob is looking back on his life, and he says that it all went wrong after he missed that fly ball. And he's saying, and because of that, everyone hated me. And so what you see is the actuality. The kids in the hallway are saying, hey, Goob, cool binder. You want to stay at my house tonight? They all hated me. And it comes from that one formative experience he had when he was younger. Now, that's a silly example, but I think there's a lot of real examples of this as well, where someone has an anchor, formative, spiritual experience that changes the way that they look at the world. There was a physicist, chemist, scientist at Rice University. His name was Rick Smalley. I have a picture of him here. Dr. Smalley was a Nobel Prize winner, and the thing that he discovered was a new form of carbon, a new carbon molecule, and it was called the buckyball. Now, I have no idea what that means, so don't ask me to explain it to you, but he was a brilliant guy, and he was at Rice, and he had this illustrious career as an academic, but he got later in life, and he started to question the way that he was living his life. He was married 4 times, and his home life was a wreck, and he wasn't happy, and he just had some questions about what's going to happen. Now, late in life, he got sick. He ended up getting leukemia, and ultimately he died a few years later. But in this later part of his life, he went to another professor at Rice, a guy named Jim Tour, who's a very strong believer, but also a brilliant scientist. And Dr. Smalley asked Dr. Tour, what is it about your life that's different? You know, I see that you're a serious scientist and you know what you're doing, but your wife also likes you. You know, your kids also like you. What do you have that is different than what I have? And so Dr. Tour answered that question. I mean, it's Jesus. The difference is that I've given my life to Christ, and it's made my life into what it is. And so they developed a friendship. And eventually, Dr. Smalley, as being a scientist, had a lot of questions about the Bible and about science and how those things could possibly be compatible. His worldview was largely at odds with what a lot of people would say is biblical Christianity. So Dr. Tour arranged to have Dr. Smalley meet another astrophysicist named Hugh Ross. We've had Hugh Ross at our church a few times. He has a ministry that basically talks about science in the Bible. Brilliant guy when he gets up and talks. Well, one time, Dr. Ross came to Rice, and so Dr. Smalley, this Nobel Prize-winning physicist whose life was a wreck, spent a few days with Dr. Tour and Dr. Ross asking him questions. And at the end of it, the way that Dr. Tour tells the story, Rick Smalley basically said, this guy knows everything about Hugh Ross. And for Dr. Smalley, what he saw was 2 equally intelligent guys, or in the same vein of what he is. They had not left their brains at the door, but they were also Christians, believers in the Bible, believers in Jesus, and their lives were different than his. And so seeing that, it gave him a plausibility structure that he could watch and say, you know what, maybe I could live my life differently as well. And so in his later years, Dr. Smalley did become a believer. Near the end of his life, he was sick, but he became a believer, and his funeral was actually here at Second Baptist Church, and our senior pastor, Ben Young, did the funeral. So you have this guy who is a Nobel Prize-winning chemist and physicist, completely brilliant, but his moment, that spiritual formative moment, was meeting these two guys. It was talking with Dr. Torr, it was talking with Dr. Ross, and even having to face his own mortality. That led him to have this formative spiritual experience. Now, I think that if you are a believer and if you dig back far enough, you've probably had a couple moments of your life that might qualify as a formative spiritual experience that has formed the way that you look at the world. Again, it might be that you had a prayer answered. It might be that you heard a certain person speak at a certain time and everything just made sense to you. Well, a lot of us have those things. And one of the key things that our church does that I think probably provides the highest number of formative spiritual experiences like that is what we do when we go to beach retreat in the summers. We have our students, our junior high students and our high school students, go to the beach, and they are taken into a different experience than what their normal life is. And I would say, there are thousands of kids, if not more, maybe it's tens of thousands, who had a formative spiritual experience at beach retreat that became that building block to change the way they look at the world. And I think what makes beach retreat work in that direction is that it removes kids from their normal everyday life, takes them away from their distractions, takes them away from the world. And it's not the lights and the hype and the all the fun at beach retreat that necessarily does it, but I think the thing that gives a lot of kids a look into something different is worship. They are put into a situation where there are thousands of people around them that are worshiping the Lord. Now, obviously, that's messy. Every kid is different. The kids have all sorts of stuff going on in their life. The adults who are our leaders have different stuff going on in our life. But God uses that for a lot of students to basically show them, your life could look like this. Your life could be centered around the worship of the Lord instead of the other things that you're trying to fill the vacuum of your life with. And so for that reason, a lot of students and even adults have these really formative spiritual experiences at beach retreat, and it's worship that does it. It's that emphasis on worship. We are still in the first W of the 3 W's that we're going to be covering in the next few weeks. And that W, if you remember last week, is the word worship. Last week, we focused on the fact that we corporately, as a church, value and emphasize worship. Coming here to be together tonight. And bonus points to all of you, again, for being here on this night to worship. You've done a great job. Corporate worship is so, so important. But in addition to that, in order for us to corporately worship the Lord the way that He's called us to do it, it also requires that you and I be individual worshipers of the Lord. We, as an individual, each one of you as an individual, has to make that decision that God is worth my worship, and I'm going to point my life in that direction. There's an A.W. Tozer quote where he basically says, God is not looking for workers. He's looking for worshipers. And the only people who are qualified to be workers for God are worshipers. And we've seen this. There are a lot of people that do things for God, but if their heart is not aligned in worship, God's not in it, and it doesn't last. God calls us to be worshipers. If you look at the section of the Bible, the divided kingdom era, where Israel splits into northern and southern kingdoms, there's a whole bunch of kings in these two kingdoms. And there is one test to see if a king in either of those places was a good king or not. And the test was this: did they worship God, and did they lead others to worship God? If so, good king. Did they not worship God? Did they lead others to worship idols? Not a good king. That's it. And really, if you get to the end of your life and the Lord is looking at the role of your life, what's He looking at? He's looking at, was this person a worshiper? Was their heart directed toward me in worship? Now, I've spent all this time telling you about formative spiritual experiences and about beach retreat, and the reason I'm telling you that is, for me, at beach retreat, I actually had maybe the biggest spiritual crisis of my life involving worship. It was not the formative spiritual experience for me that led me close to the Lord. In fact, it's the thing that made me freak out about something being wrong with me. And I'm going to tell you about that, not yet, in a few minutes. What we're going to talk about tonight, though, is individual worship. God has called you, and He's called me to be an individual worshiper of Him. And then we come together as a group and worship Him as well. So how is it that you and I can form our life so that we are worshipers? not simply workers, not simply people trying to do whatever it is that makes us happy, but a worshiper of the Lord, what has to happen for that to take place? And the first thing I want to do is read the main passage that I want to think about tonight, and it's in Romans chapter 12. The Apostle Paul is speaking to the church, and he says this to them: "Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." The way Paul talks about us being an individual worshiper looks like this. You lay your body and your life on the altar to the Lord. You present your life to the Lord as a living sacrifice. Everything that is mine belongs to you. It's the direction of your heart saying, God, you are number one. So, how is it that you, in this next year, maybe this week, in the next few months, can align your heart to be a worshiper of God? The first thing you have to do is this. You have to decide to live a life of worship. Decide. That's the key word here. Worship is not a thing that just happens accidentally. We have to do it on purpose. So the first thing is this. You have to commit to saying, God is worthy of my worship. So that means you have to acknowledge that he's worthy. Acknowledge his worth. That's step number one. It has to start with saying, God is worth me pouring my heart to, giving my devotion to, pointing my thoughts toward. The second thing is you have to commit to point your life toward the Lord. So acknowledge his worth, commit to pointing your life toward him. And the reason for this is that you do not drift your way into worship. I think you've probably seen this anecdotally in your life. Our life is not like Mr. Magoo. I don't know if any of you guys watched the Mr. Magoo cartoon when you were a kid. Mr. Magoo is essentially a blind old man who wanders through life just narrowly avoiding catastrophic disaster everywhere he goes. And it's just serendipity that saves him everywhere he is. I would encourage you to watch clips of Mr. Magoo. It's pretty funny. But life does not work like that. Anything that you want to do that is going to lead you toward where God wants you to go, it has to happen on purpose. Now, obviously, sometimes God will do things in your life that you have nothing to do with, and he'll protect you and preserve you. But if you want to have a heart of worship, you're not going to accident your way into that. You have to decide to do it. You have to move your life in that direction, and you have to work toward it. You have to acknowledge that this is what I want to do. So that first D that I want to talk about tonight is decide. You have to decide to live a life of worship. The second thing, and this is where we're going to spend the majority of our time, and I think for some of you, this might be a very helpful thing. This has been for me, so I hope it is for you. The second thing is we need to discover the ways that you individually connect with God and delight in him. I made you wait for a minute, and I'm going to tell you about this crisis of my life, going to Beach Street. So I grew up from a pretty young age being a believer. My sister led me to Christ when I was a 6-year-old in our living room. So I was a believer from the time I was very young. And I would say by the time I was in middle school, and certainly in high school, I was a pretty serious believer. Like, I cared about what God wanted for my life. I wanted to obey him. I wanted to honor him with my life. I was nowhere near perfect. Don't ask my parents about that. They would tell you. But I was a pretty serious believer. But I would go to Beach Retreat starting in middle school, and I loved Beach Retreat. I have so many good memories of being there. I loved basically every part of it. But the issue for me at Beach Retreat was pretty simple. I think Beach Retreat is largely characterized by this incredible time of worship with everyone in the room, and a lot of that being the music part of the worship. It's loud, it's very high quality, you're there a long time, and it really is just an incredible experience. A lot of kids go there and they're like, this is what this can be like, it's amazing. So here's what I remember from being at Beach Retreat. I like music, I like worshiping through music, I do enjoy that. But here's what I would remember. I was a serious believer, wanting to honor the Lord. I would love silent sounds. I would love to hear the message. But we'd get into about the 6th song of the worship set, and we'd be repeating the chorus of that song maybe for the 8th time. And I would start to think, my feet hurt. Like, I need to focus on the Lord. Let's get back to singing the lyrics again. But the index toe on my right foot is just barking at me. Like, please, can we sit down? When is the message going to start? The song ends, another song starts. Another song? Why is this happening? But here's what ended up happening to me during all this. I started to really doubt if there was something wrong with me. Like, I would look around me and I would see my other friends and some of the leaders and all these people having transcendent worship experiences with the Lord, totally connected with him, and I'm over here just thinking, why are my dogs barking at me? Like, can we sit down? I mean, do you have to repeat the chorus 14 times? Now, by the way, I think we do a better job of that now at Beach Retreat than when I was a student. But I just remember thinking, there's something wrong with me. Why am I not connected with God so closely at this moment? Why is my mind wandering to other things? Like, clearly, there must be some sort of undealt with sin that I'm going to find out later. Like, what's happening to me? And it wasn't until years later that I kind of received some of the vocabulary that helped me understand it wasn't that there was anything wrong with me. It's just that I'm a normal person. And here's what I found out. I came across a book by a guy that was a pastor at our church for a long time. His name's Gary Thomas. And the book that I read was one called Sacred Pathways, was the name of the book. And the basic thesis of the book is this. He lays out 9 different, what he calls pathways, meaning different ways that over the course of church history that people have connected with God. And so the idea is that each of us has a different spiritual temperament, that you might connect with God more strongly in one of these pathways than another. Or maybe it's a few that you really connect with the Lord, and then there might be a few that you don't connect with him at all in. And so if you are like me, and you have found yourself at times looking around the room thinking, man, I must really not love God because I'm not feeling what's going on right now at this moment. I want to maybe help you out a little bit on this. Here's what Gary identifies. He identifies a few ways that people connect with the Lord. The first one is this. He says, some people connect with the Lord when they are in nature. So he calls that the naturalist, the person who loves the Lord when they're outdoors. Now, I would tell you on a personal note, this is one of the areas that I feel like I do connect with the Lord when I'm in nature. Now, for us, living in Houston, you have to put a little effort into that if you are going to connect with God in nature. Now, this area of town's okay. I grew up in town, and it took a lot of effort to ever be outdoors to connect with the Lord. But maybe you are the kind of person that you connect with God when you are in nature. The next would be the sensate, and that's a person who loves God through the senses. Maybe you feel like you connect with God really closely when you have something tangible and tactile to work with. Maybe when you're taking the Lord's Supper and you are feeling the bread and the cup. And those things make you feel connected with the Lord. There are people that connect in that way. There's traditionalists. That's people who love God through ritual and symbol. Maybe you're the type of person that you have rituals for like everything that you do in your life, and you feel yourself drawn to certain things. There are certain church denominations that have more ritual involved in the way they do worship than we do. But that's one way that people connect with the Lord. Ascetics, these are people that connect with God when they are in solitude or in simplicity. So, there are some of you that maybe when you separate from everyone else and you sit down, you could just sit there for an hour in thought, and you feel like you connect with the Lord that way. And there's some of you that sit down alone for 35 seconds, and you're like, get me out of here. Anyway, we'll talk about that at a different time. Activists. These are people who love God through confrontation and doing justice. So this would be somebody who is drawn toward doing justice in the world as an act of worship. There are many people that are such. That this is pretty far outside of what my thing is. So I don't understand people that are like this. But there are some people that connect with the Lord in that way. I would maybe throw out a couple people from history that might be like that. The prophets in Israel. Some of them might have been people who were activists in nature. They were connecting with the God of Israel by talking about corruption going on in the nations of Israel and Judah. William Wilberforce, one of the key people, a staunch believer in the Lord, who was the main person in getting rid of the slave trade in the British Empire. He probably connected with the Lord this way. Caregivers. Some of you are caregivers where you love God by loving others. Maybe you have that gift of hospitality. You feel connected with the Lord when you see somebody hurting and you're meeting needs for them. Man, I'm so grateful that we have people that worship the Lord that way. Enthusiasts, you are the people who love God with mystery and celebration. This is the person that when my feet were starting to hurt, they were just getting warmed up. Let's go 48 songs deep. We're going to be here for hours. I want to go to a concert. Let's worship for days. That would be you if you're an enthusiast. Contemplatives are people who love God through adoration. I would say these two probably go hand in hand, the enthusiast and the contemplative. By the way, I do want you to know, our staff, our worship staff, put together a Spotify playlist this week. If one of the ways that you connect with the Lord strongly is in music, if you either use the QR code that's behind me, or if you look up, I think it's SBC North on Spotify, you can find this playlist. These specifically are songs of praise that are directed toward the Lord. So these are not just songs that talk about God. They are songs specifically where you are singing to the Lord. So we want to give you that as a resource. If you're the type of person where that's a way to connect with the Lord, go for it. And then lastly, intellectuals. This doesn't mean smart people, but it means people who connect with the Lord when their mind is engaged. And so I would tell you, just from looking at this list of things, and by the way, this is not a list that's in the Bible. This is just a template to help us understand. For me, I think I connect with the Lord most strongly through that intellectual pathway, meaning when my mind is engaged. That is a lot of times when I feel closest to the Lord. I think I've told the story about this before, where one of the most worshipful experiences of my life came when I was reading a book. And at the end of it, I just had this overwhelming moment of worship with the Lord alone in my house at 3 o'clock in the morning. And then also being out in nature. Now, the reason I say all this is just to give you tools to say, if you look around at other people and you think, man, they connect with the Lord so strongly this way, and I don't, there must be something wrong with me. It might simply be that God did not wire you that way. Maybe God didn't wire you to connect with him through passionately singing and throwing your hands in the air and waving a flag in the air, A lot of churches have a flag lady that has a flag going around. Maybe that is not the strongest way that God has called you individually to worship of him. So I hope this tool is helpful for you. It's worth looking into and discovering what are the moments in my life where I do feel like I've connected with the Lord the strongest and I have delighted in him the most, and then ask, maybe it's because it was in one of these avenues. Maybe it was a moment where I was doing something, an act of justice that needed to be done, and I felt connected with the Lord when I did it. Maybe it was a time when I had to take care of somebody who was hurting or dying or in a difficult season of their life, and I connected with the Lord when that happened. Well, you need to pay attention to that, because we are called to worship the Lord together, but you are also called to worship the Lord individually. So discover the ways that you connect with God the most strongly. And then lastly, once that happens, you then need to discipline your life to make time for individual worship. So if you know that you connect with the Lord by being out in nature, you don't get the excuse of saying, well, I haven't been outside this year, so I don't feel close to the Lord. You have to discipline your life so that you have avenues to worship the Lord. If you worship the Lord in song, there is no excuse for you to not find times to listen to music that will connect you to the Lord or for you to praise him. There are opportunities for it if you discipline your life to have it. In the book of Daniel, this is in Daniel chapter 6, some of Daniel's enemies want to get him caught. He's in the Babylonian Empire here. And the way that they're able to get him caught is that they know he prays to the Lord 3 times a day, every day. He's disciplined in it. And so they make the king sign a decree. You can't bow down to anyone except for the king for this many days. And this is what the verse says. Now, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now, in his roof chamber, he had windows open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before God, as he had been doing previously. It was the habit and discipline of his life that he prayed 3 times a day, every day. Worship is great when it's spontaneous. There are times in your life, and there have been times in my life, where there have been spontaneous moments where I felt like I've connected with God. You cannot rely on that happening for you every day. You have to discipline your life so that once you know, this is how I connect with God on an individual level, in addition to being with other believers, I've got to make room for that in my life. Make room in your life for the things that are important. And there's nothing more important than worship. This is what it says in 1 Samuel. Samuel speaking, and he says, has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. This is not simply about making the Lord not angry with you. And Samuel's saying, God doesn't just want you to burn animals as sacrifices to him. He's speaking to Saul at this point, actually. He says what God wants is obedience. And if you remember, we talked about this last week, if you look back at the law that God gave to Israel, there really was one law. Don't have other gods before me. I'm your God. Don't worship idols. Worship me. Worshiping the Lord is an act of obedience. So we need to discipline our lives in that direction so that we are worshiping him, giving him our time, giving him our energy. And that leads me back to the main passage for today. Paul describes it this way. Your whole life needs to be an offering to the Lord. Years ago, I saw Dr. Young give a sermon where he was talking about when we were pledging, about what we were going to give. He had a prop. It was a giant tithe offering plate, and it was on the stage. And basically he said, when we're giving to the Lord, it's not about you taking your wallet and dropping it in the plate. When we are giving, or when we're offering things to the Lord, we put ourselves in the plate. What God doesn't want is your stuff. He doesn't want your lip service toward him. He wants your life and he wants your heart. And that ultimately is worship. So that's why Paul says, I urge you, by God's mercy he's given you, present your entire life as a living sacrifice to the Lord. That starts by committing to worshiping him together, which we're doing now. But the question, though, then is my heart on an individual level directed toward the God of the universe? My love, my affection, my energy, my passion, is that where it's directed, or is it somewhere else? Bob Dylan years ago said, everybody's got to serve somebody. There's no such thing as a person who doesn't worship. We are wired to worship. It's something that you are going to do. And so the question is, where is your worship directed right now?